Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's another Wednesday. It's another 11 a.m. Merry Christmas to everybody. Whenever you're watching this, we'll have around Christmas time. So I hope you're feasting. I hope you're celebrating. I hope you're drinking a lot, eating a lot of food. And maybe you listen to this once the big Christmas party is over. All right, let's get started. What's the first question of the day?
Hi, good morning. So the first question is one of your followers sent the message like Nordic hamstring curls suck? Are they good? What is the benefit? What is the disadvantage? What are your thoughts?
All right, so first things first. So I coach position with tension. So my point is always, what's the purpose of the exercise? That means which position are you training and which tension you want to achieve or train, whatever you want to call it. So my point being is, whenever somebody asks me about an exercise, if it's good or not, I'll re-ask the question, which is, okay, what are you doing it for? Um, as far as I know, the Nordic hamstring curl is for training your hamstrings and slash glutes eccentrically in sports scientific terms, which means lengthening or absorbing tension, right? I think we can all agree on that. I hope that we can all agree on that this is the function that Nordic hamstring curl should actually be doing. All right, so let's take a step back. What do we need to train in terms of position and tension for your hip? Because the hamstring is for the hip. So first of all, we need a neutral hip. So that's already the first one, which is really hard to do in a Nordic hamstring curl, is lowering yourself down while keeping your hips neutral. What's the point of a hip neutral? Neutral means not tilted forward and not tilted backwards. So no stripper pose, your butt sticking out, and no, it's called butt wink position. That means you're tucking your hips underneath your body, right? So we want to stay in between, neutral. Why is that so important? Because your hamstrings attach at the bottom of your pelvis. So that means whenever your pelvis is tilting forwards or backwards, something is happening with your hamstrings. Might be good, might be bad, doesn't matter at this point. So the whole point about a hamstring curl should be your hips should not move either to the front or to the back. Most of the time, it is like 99 of 100 cases, your hips are going to tilt forward because you have no strength, tension, whatever in your hamstring. So that's already that's already a no-go. And the second portion is the tension portion is about the hamstring. Each muscle has three different functions, right? It can either produce, absorb, or stabilize. Fancy terms means isometric, concentric, and eccentric contraction, right? Whenever a big muscle is lacking one of those three or more, there's going to be an issue and a problem. So that's how I view training muscles is, okay, a muscle has certain jobs, like three of them, different faces, different personalities. I call it the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde principle in the book. And we have to train all three in combination with the position. All right, so what does it mean for the hamstring curl? What are you doing this exercise for in terms of position? That means for which exercise do you want to use the eccentric training of your hamstring while doing a Nordic hamstring curl? And that's where we're already struggling because there is no answer to this. Because not the only movement, but the only position your hip needs to be in to get that tension eccentrically is literally taking your hips and going backwards. Let's call it the descent going down in a squat, right? That's where you need your hamstrings to absorb tension or to work eccentrically. Okay, now there's a problem. So the Nordic hamstring curl has the eccentric portion in it, but it does not have the hips moving back portion. Your hip stays in the same place, other than tilting forwards and backwards, unfortunately. So that already means there's a disconnect between your hips moving and what the muscle should be doing, right? So this is how I view exercises. And from that view, a Nordic hamstring curl doesn't make any sense. There's another layer to this, that it's technically extremely complicated, hips tilting. Plus, even if you can keep your hips neutral, that almost every single time means you're keeping your knees bent. That means you're never going to straighten them fully out, which is what would be actually needed for the hamstring. So you're never going to have the full attention and tension on the hamstring. So when I read, when I wrote that chapter in the book, I thought really hard to find a valid case when you do hamstring curls, and I couldn't find one. So for normal, we never do Nordic hamstring curls for normal people. So what's a different option? Position with tension. That means I have to train my hips going from a standing position backwards, somewhere else backwards, right? While using my hamstrings to absorb tension, that means it's going to lengthen. Sweet. What about a box squat, for example, with a sandbag? Well, we've never talked about the box squat before, but that makes sense. So you're training the job of a muscle plus the position where your bones need to be in. That was Toby. Hi, Toby. So that makes sense for me, right? And we can go a step further and talk about, okay, we're always talking about compound movement and functional movement. And all of a sudden you're doing an isolated, so to speak, isolated Nordic hamstring curl and have no clue what that thing, what you just trained for, what are you going to use it for? It's just an assistance work in a workout. But that doesn't make sense if there's no valid application, whether it's in your training or in real life. I agree that we should train our hamstrings eccentrically to absorb tension. Absolutely. I'm disagreeing with the position of your hip it needs to be in. And there's a last point. There's a very, 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 very big but with one T in there. I could be totally comfortable with, yeah, it doesn't do any good, but it doesn't do any bad, the Nordic hamstring curl, but it does. And I'm going to tell you why. This is the same principle that we talked about a couple of episodes ago about the shoulder, the pec, and the triceps. It's the same with the hip and the hamstring. So you're doing a hamstring curl. Your hip is tilting forward, right? That means once you lower yourself down with your hip still in a very fine position, that means obviously your hamstrings are going to be already loaded. Now something happens. Once you start tilting your hips in that direction, through the attachment, so through tendons on your pelvis that connects to your hamstring, that means you're going to move the muscle and the tendon under tension already. That's the same as displacing the shoulder in a bench press. That's a disaster because that's where tendons and like the first part of the muscle start to not only bitch, but tear. Right? And that's what we see a lot going on now on Instagram is people doing Romanian deadlift, same principles in the Nordic hamstring curl, tilting the hips to get more tension in. But that also means you're gonna stress the hamstring plus displace joints and bones, and that's gonna cause troubles, so to speak. Here's the issue with tilting your hip. And that's why I don't like to talk about feelings in general, but especially when it comes to training, is yes, it feels like more tension once you tilt your hip backwards. So stripper pose. Why? Because once you move your bone, your pelvis backwards, that means your hamstrings are gonna be on tension earlier, right? And I kind of get it. It's a tool to play with. But if you have no clue where to position your hips, that's going to lead to the topic we just talked about, which is once the bone starts moving while the hamstring is on tension, that's where the tears are going to happen. And that's bad. That's one thing we want to avoid. So we have to couple position with tension. Tension means jobs of a muscle, three muscle jobs, nothing new. The application of it is brand new, and that's what we're doing.
Is actually the hip rollout also a good alternative to the Nordic hamstring curl?
No, there's no. It's a tool to learn how a neutral hip should feel, but it has no impact whatsoever on your hamstrings. That's more of a top down oblique hip exercise rather than a bottom up hamstring glutes to your hips. So that's more on the other side.
Okay. The second question we got was concerning what you call the ping pong cycle. And I know that you touch on that very deeply in your book. Can you give us a short kind of like info on what you think when you say the ping pong cycle and how you use it in your own training?
Mm-hmm. All right. So the let's take a step back and zoom out. So the big question is literally how to get stronger, right? And today there's one approach, which is all right, you have to use more weight and you have to have some sort of progression in there. That means whether that's reps up or down, whether that's weight up or down, whether that's percentages up and down. So that's a very common approach, whether that's a Smolov cycle or a Wendler, so 5-3-1 cycle. There's a lot of proven records out there that work. My issue is those cycles work for really good athletes every single time. I'm not denying that fact at all, right? There's a reason why it's called the Smolov cycle, because a guy named Smolov trained Russian weightlifters. There's a reason why there's a Wendler cycle, because he trained like professional athletes. My thing is, I want to teach normal people who train like 2 or 3 times a week how to get stronger. And that's not working for normal people. And maybe we'll come back in the end why it's not working. Let me offer a different approach. Here's mine. Very practical about the box squat. So in week 1, you do 5 reps of a box squat. I'm not going to go over all the details how a box squat should be performed. There's a lot of videos about it, or I describe it in the book. But that's your constraints about position and tension. So those two things have to stay in place. Otherwise, nothing after it makes sense whatsoever. So you have to take care of where your bones are, and you have to take care of which muscles should move them there, right? So that's set in stone. So you do like 5 reps in the first week, whatever. Let's call it, let's take my training from this week. I started with whatever, 140 kilos doing 5 reps. Now there's 2 variables that we can play with. Again, position with tension is there. We're adding 2 variables. One is depth, so how far you're going to go down. And the second one is the number of reps, plus a little bit of weight underneath it. So let's call it 2.5 variables. Let's talk about depth first. So the goal of a box squat is to hit 90 degrees with your knees. That means your big thigh bone behind your ankle. Should I go into the knee debate here? I'll talk about the knee. There's no such thing as a knee, right? I know we say knee and we talk about the knee and we call it knee, but there's no knee. There's a big thigh bone and there's bones from the lower part of your leg coming together. There's a kneecap on top, and then there's a couple of ligaments and cartilage and tendons in there, and that's it. So there's no like structure as in a knee. We call that conglomerate of those things that I just mentioned a knee. So when I say keep your knee behind your ankle, I literally mean your big thigh bone, the end of your big thigh bone should be behind your ankle. All right, so that's the first one. And that's probably the most important one for the box squat. All right. So I'll start box squatting. I'll do 5 reps to full depth. Full depth means to a box, to a bench at 90 degrees. Why am I not going lower? The short answer is there is no need to go below 90 degrees whatsoever with load on your back and on your spine. There's 3 positions of your hip. The first one is tucking your pelvis, the butt wink, which naturally happens once you go roughly below 90 degrees. That's not a mistake. That's not something's off. That's a resting position. That's a valid position in nature, which is just not meant to be loaded because your spine's moving, and that's fine as long as you don't put weight on it. So whenever you see somebody sitting on the ground somewhere, like in a paleo seat, like that's a resting position meant to be done for hours and just relax down there. So that's where we're just squatting to 90 degrees. The second position of your hip is the hip tilting forward. That is also a valid position for jumping. Jumping only happens, so loading for a jump only happens from 90 degrees on, right? So overextending is not a mistake or a failure. We just have to understand what's the purpose of it. And obviously, that's a second unloaded position that your hip can be in, right? So the overarching position or the butt wink position are valid positions. They're just not meant to be loaded. So what's meant to be loaded? Surprise, surprise, it's a neutral hip position. And that's why I'm focusing on it so much. And that's why I'm just squatting to 90 degrees in a box squat. So I start my first set. I'll go literally to 90 degrees. I'll pause. I'll make sure everything's set in for the box squat. I'll do 5 reps, right? I'll watch the video of me just doing the box squat and be like, okay, what did your knees do? All right, knees are fine. I can keep them behind my ankles. I can push through my heels up. I can literally use the glute hamstring insertion that's right below your butt cheek, so to speak. That's what I'm going to use to push myself up. All right, everything's in place. Perfect. So I may add weight to 90 degrees until I see major bone displacements. Major as in, it's okay if your knees come slightly forward or come in slightly. Like, that's not cancer. That's totally fine. We need to have a threshold where we can work in. If your knees almost touch each other, obviously that's too much. If you're shooting your knees forward once you're going up, that's too much, right? But that's where we need coaches, because that's a valid position. That's the threshold we need to be in. But that's my parameter of measuring if I can add more weight or not. Once I hit that threshold, that means this week, I think it was 160 for 5, where I had troubles, keeping my balance on the heels or pushing off my heels. Like, okay, that was still 5 good reps, but if I add more weight, I cannot focus on those 3 constraints anymore. That's where the ping pong comes in, and I'm not going to stop here because I want to use more weight. So what am I going to do? I'm going to decrease the depth. That means, very simply speaking, I'll just add a plate, 1 plate. I'll put 1 plate on the bench. So I can't squat to 90, but to whatever the angle is, let's call it 100 degrees, right? And then I start all over again. I use 160, go for 5. I use 170, go for 5, etc. Go for maybe 175. I did 175 this week. And then again, I'm still at a threshold, but it's getting closer to me not realizing what I'm still doing here. And that happens pretty fast. So whenever that happens, guess what? I want to use more weight, so I'll add a 2nd plate on the bench, right? So I can squat to whatever the angle is. It's called 110 degrees. Same principle. I add more weight, and that's as high or low, whatever you want to call it, as I'm going for that day. I'm never going to go higher than 2 plates. Why? Because my goal is, go ahead.
That would have been my question, if you ever add more than 2 plates, if there is like an upper line that you don't want to cross.
Yes, so the threshold means I'm working between 90 and 120 degrees. Why I want 120, there's enough science on it. 120 degrees is like your most powerful, like, big thigh bone hip position. That's where all the good stuff like triple extension actually happens at 120 degrees of knee angle, right? So that I'll work within 90 to 120 degrees. That's it. That's as far as I go. What's the goal of the box squat for me? It's super simple. And that comes from our development assessment templates. The goal is to hit 5 box squats at 90 degrees at your 1 rep max back squat. So that's our structural approach to testing if your body is ready to handle 200 kilos or whatever on a normal back squat. You can test that on a box squat, because the goal is to be able to make predictions, right? So I have to know if I can squat, in my case, 200 kilos for 5 reps to 90 degrees on a box squat with all the constraints I just mentioned, position with tension, then I know I can do 1 full rep, powerlifting squat rep below 90 degrees with a barbell with 200 kilos. Right? Because then I know my body can take 200 kilos with my hamstrings going down, with my hips shooting back 5 times. And that means I'm safe for doing 1 rep at 200 kilos without the bench, just going up and down. Mm-hmm. So that's, we kind of flip the script on how to train for things. It's not, I use the back squat for getting stronger. I use the back squat for testing and use training exercises to get stronger, right? And if you happen to need the back squat for whatever reason, maybe you're a powerlifter, that's cool. But what if you don't need it? I think normal people don't need it at all, like zero back squatting with a barbell necessary. Then you're just going to stick with the box squat, and that's totally fine. And we did some fun experiments at the gym, which maybe we'll talk next time. But what we see is once you have certain numbers on your training exercises, the transitioning to what we call testing exercises, like the barbell back squat, the barbell deadlift, and the barbell bench press, is so easy because people know what to do in terms of position with tension. And then it's just adjusting to a different starting position, to a different whatever the exercise requirements are. And that's fun because then you can play a really cool game, which is, yes, we need to work on a threshold, but we need to keep it safe too. And I can make predictions about how much weight you can deadlift without you having ever deadlifted in your life. That's it. So that's a ping pong cycle. Maybe two final sentences on a ping pong cycle. Why is it called ping pong? Because the goal is, as I said, it's 5 times your 100 max barbell back squat on the box squat. Whenever I hit 190 for 3 this week. So why 3? I never go below 3 and I never go above 5. So whenever I hit 3 on the highest plate, so to speak, on the 120-degree angle, that means next week I'm gonna shoot for 4 at 190 at the same height. The week after, I'm gonna go for 5 with 190 on the same depth. Now that's the fun part. Whenever I hit 5 reps with a certain weight, and again with all the constraints I mentioned, knee tension, position with tension, then I'll add weight. But I'm gonna restart at 3 reps. So that means, very, very practically speaking, whenever I hit 190 for 5, next week I'm gonna go for 195 times 3.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense? And then 195 for 4, 195 for 5. And whenever I hit that, I go 200 times 3, and then 200 times 4, 200 times 5. Okay, that doesn't mean I'm going to add weight every single week. Of course not, because in that case, I would squat like 500 kilos in whatever, 6 months. That's not going to happen. But of course, sometimes I'll stay on a certain weight for a couple of weeks, right? Because I cannot fulfill my own constraints about the bone position and the tension I'm using, which is fine. So I'll take 2, 3, 4 weeks until, and that's super important, until I own the weight, until I own 190, until I own 195. And owning is not a head game. Owning is position and tension is there. That's when you own a weight. And that's when you can wake yourself up at 3 a.m. in the morning and be like, okay, go squat 195. It's like, you know what to do and you know that it's going to happen because that's what you've been training for. And it's not just hoping and praying like back in my CrossFit days where I think my max squat was 170. Yeah. But that 170, I hit 170 once. That means after like years of training, I hit it once because that was Christmas and Easter on the same day. And a unicorn appeared and whatever happened. And I had a good night's sleep and I was well fed, whatever. And I could never do 170 for like 2 years after that, which is crazy, right? And that's what I want to get rid of. I want to make it predictable and repeatable. So it's an endless hockey stick progression cycle with obviously some smartness in between. But I want to get rid of that throwing yourself down, bouncing off, and then like, yeah, celebrating a PR. Like, I don't give a damn about your fucking PR. I could not care less. What I'm really interested in is if you hit a weight, and then 7 days after it, can you hit it again? And how's the difference? How's it going to look? How's your shoulder going to feel? Can you actually do it? Or are your hips hurting? Are your shoulders hurting? Like, we have to step away from that very focused timeline day view of, okay, this is when I hit a PR. I'm not interested in your PR. show me your last 6 to 12 months of training, show me your progression in training, and I can tell you if there's a problem or not. That was a lot about the ping pong cycle, but I think we have to flip the script on programming and percentages, because yes, I use percentages, but as a goal at the end to work for. For example, 50% of your body weight, 50% of your front squat on the barbell, you should be able to do it on with a sandbag for 5 reps. Right? That's great. That's a measurable goal. What's not working for most people, especially normal people, is you have to hit 3 reps at 85% today, because that's in your training program. That's not how training works for normal people. That works brilliantly for professional athletes, for seasoned athletes who have a lot of training experience. Works perfectly, because guess what? They know when they shouldn't do the 3 reps at 85% because they're just fucking tired from yesterday's training. But us, normal people, we're just going to do it because it's in the Excel sheet. And it says you have to do 3 reps at 85%. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's where we totally got rid of that approach. And we use the ping pong cycle principle that I've just talked about today.
Love it.
Well, that's great. I hope there's other people out there who love it too. I love that stuff. I love figuring out why some people are quote unquote failing. You're not failing out there. You never have been taught a different way of viewing things or trying different things. Final words, because I see people struggling with this a lot. We have to relearn what learning really means. Learning is not watching a video. You're watching a video right now, which is awesome. It's a good first step. Learning is not reading a book. Learning is not listening to something. Learning will always be and was always about changing your behavior. So doing something differently that you've done until that point. Einstein said, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results is literally insanity. But that's what we're all doing, more or less. So when you're listening to this, I encourage you to try one thing and one thing only. Hop on the traveling circus, hop on YouTube, watch some box squat videos, and start there. Master the box squat, and you will see that knees and hips and spine and upper back issues are gonna get much less. Focus on one thing, get really, really good at it, and trust me, it's gonna rock your world, but it's gonna change your world. So awesome that you watched this video, and now go into box squat. Like right now, you can do it in your living room. You have a chair somewhere roughly 90 degrees. You can grab something in the front rack, whether that's a couple of bottles of water, whether that's another chair, whether that's your dog, whether that's your spouse. I don't care. Like, do it right now. Do 5 reps, then you have learned, because then you have started to change your behavior of using whatever muscles you're now using in a squat to doing something differently. And then you can expect different results, right? So this is the downside of 2024. There's all the information available. You can go to Harvard online. You can literally watch every single speech that was ever out there online on video. And most people are not doing anything, right? So you think you're smart, you're feeling smart because you know so much stuff, but the beauty is in the application and actually you doing stuff. So if you watch this video and do nothing, you're not going to do 5 box squats, then you have not learned. Awesome, guys. So that's it for today. I love those Wednesday 11 a.m. calls. I'm excited to answer more questions, bring them on, whatever it is, stupid or not, I don't care. I'll answer any question that's out there. Bring it on, and we'll see each other next week. Hey, Merry Christmas.